And now, tonight's author, Garth Stein. Garth Stein is a best-selling author of several novels, a playwright, a documentary filmmaker, and a co-founder of a nonprofit, Seattle 7 Writers, dedicated to inspiring and energizing readers and writers. Perhaps tonight he'll reveal other creative and humanitarian pursuits that I wasn't able to uncover. A few years ago, Garth published the hugely popular The Art of Racing in the Rain, which has sold more than 4 million copies in 35 languages. Spent more than 3 years in the New York Times bestseller list, won a Pacific Northwest Booksellers Association Award, inspired a young readers edition as well as a children's picture book edition, stage adaptation by Seattle's very own Book It Repertory Theater, and is currently in development with Universal Studios for a major motion picture. Not bad for a single title. Mr. Stein now returns with his new book, A Sudden Light, the story of a 14-year-old boy discovering the secrets of his family and their namesake house built from the spoils of a timber fortune of a previous era. The boy's father wants to sell off the house and property to developers and retire on the proceeds, but the boy, Trevor, discovers the house to be inhabited by a spirit with other designs. A rich, atmospheric work, A Sudden Light is winning accolades from readers and reviewers. We're lucky tonight to have the book's author to introduce us to his new work. Please join me in welcoming tonight's guest, Garth Stein.
I've got a tray table. Hold on a second. Did anybody not get matches? Somebody came. You didn't. You need matches. There's more matches. I'm going to explain the significance of the matches. And then also, before I get started, I have to do something. I got to get this because I always forget, and Enzo's so cute. Enzo. I'm going to read you a little story before bed tonight so you can. So this is kind of a fun book. I just want to show you some of the pictures in it. Show you some of the pictures in it. Thank you so much, University Bookstore, one of the great, Seattle has so many fantastic bookstores, as you all know, because you're here, you're readers, and you like going out and doing events. I give a little speech before every talk that I give, and so I have to give it to you now. I'll try to keep it short. But I write novels, not haikus, so it may go on a little bit. My job as a writer isn't just to get people to read books. Sorry, it's not just to write books, it's also to get people to read books. An unread book, I feel, is not really worth anything at all, because a book is a conversation. It's a dialogue between a reader and a writer. And so an unread book is really nothing more than a colorful doorstop. That's all it's worth. So I can't put a book into every single person's hand to say, here, please read this book and let's have this dialogue. So I depend on these deputies who I've been for years placing secretly in your communities all across this country, and these people are booksellers and librarians. Booksellers and librarians are the best helper to a writer, because they get books into the hands of readers. Booksellers and librarians do what they do for a passion of love for the written word. They love reading, they love talking about books, they love sharing books, and this is, hey, there's Brian. Hi, Brian. And so, hold on one second. I can carry this. Can I carry this room?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Ugh, this thing is like sticking, and I'm looking through the thing at you, and I'm getting distracted. So my job isn't just I need to get people to read books, as I said, and what's wonderful is having all these great bookstores and libraries in our communities. It's about more than just a place to buy books, University Bookstore. It's a place for people to congregate and to exchange ideas. Same thing with our libraries. Libraries aren't just to loan out books. They also offer a vast array of services to the communities. English as a second language. They do programs for young people. And they provide internet access, for instance, to people who don't have access to computers. And in this day and age, we think everybody's got a computer. Not everybody has a computer. And sometimes someone needs to go in and find a computer to fill out a job application or fill out some government forms or something. And so libraries provide that for them, real honest services for our communities. So we need to make sure that these places stay parts of our communities. In this day and age with the internet, we can narrow our focus, we can narrow our bandwidth, make it really fine. And if we're really smart, and I know that everybody here in this room is actually really smart, we can pick and choose the avenues of information that we get so that we only hear opinions that totally agree with us. And that's really great. That's really great for our egos. But it's not great for our society. Because our society is based on this idea of civil discourse, of agreeing to disagree, of exchanging ideas, of just because we disagree doesn't mean we have to come to fisticuffs. What happens when we take that other route where we stop listening to the other side and we just believe and get our own avenues of information? We become the federal government, right? We shut down, we stop doing anything at all. I mean, it's really quite absurd. I find it very frustrating. Why can't we just say, look, we need to come together in a room and talk it out and come to some kind of a middle ground? Our local businesses, our libraries, our local community centers, these are places where this happens. And as a writer, I'm particularly defensive of our bookstores. If our bookstores leave our streets, our avenue, our university, if the Ave doesn't have University Bookstore, if Capitol Hill doesn't have its fabulous bookstores, if Eagle Harbor leaves Bainbridge, if Island Books leaves Mercer Island, our communities, our local communities will notice the change and it will become a darker place. And I think we have to make sure that we preserve these places in our society. So I encourage you to take the extra few steps and spend the extra few cents to support your local bookstore. And I encourage you to support your libraries by voting, by donations, by volunteering your time, even by checking out books. You're helping them because it raises the circulation numbers. So that's enough of my lecture. Sorry about that. I get carried away. So I have another piece of business. Gosh, it's all about business. Hold on, I have to do this because I do it, and it's what I do. So all right, looks kind of, yeah. There you go. I see you. Yeah. All right, good. Y'all are going to be on Facebook later on tonight. Friend me, follow me, like me. This also I have to do. This is my last piece of business. This is this really. Have you seen one of these before? It's an iPad. You touch it and things happen. Oh look, there's a picture of me climbing an 800-year-old redwood tree. That's pretty cool. Yeah, that happens on my iPad. Doesn't happen on yours. But on here, I'm going to have it over here later, and then you can sign up for my. I went totally digital. You could sign up for my newsletter. I have a newsletter every couple months that goes out, and you can sign up for it. And by using the little thing I'll put up on that. It's an app. And anyway, so the thing is, if you sign up for my newsletter in this, like when I'm doing this promotional stuff for this book, we're going to pick some winners, and I'm going to do Skype things with you, like with your book club or something. I've learned not to ever go to someone's house for a book club. That's dangerous. But Skype I can do because I'm safe. And then and so you can win a Skype with your book club. And if you don't have a book club, I'll still Skype with you. If you win, you open a bottle of wine on your side, I open a bottle of wine on my side. We have a glass of wine together, talk about all sorts of things. It'd be fun. So if you want to sign up for my newsletter, I don't use it for anything except my own personal purposes. So you don't have to worry about your email getting away. So I did this book, The Art of Racing in the Rain, and it was like really, it became like this huge event. It went on for years, and I traveled all over the country, and I met thousands of people, and it's really quite fun and amazing. And it's a little seductive, because I was doing, going to weird places, Schenectady, New York, or Syracuse, and doing these big, huge events. And so it's really a lot of fun, but I am a writer, and I do need to write. So I have written a new book, and I want to tell you about it, and then tell you about it somewhat briefly, and then we could do questions and answers for as long as you like. Feel free at any point to just stand up and go get yourself more Pellegrino or wine. Or if you want to signal, Tim can come around and pour. And we'll put the tip jar out later. So I grew up here in Seattle. I grew up in the North End. I grew up in Shoreline. Now it's Shoreline. Then it used to be unincorporated King County, in a neighborhood called Innisarden. I went to Shorewood High School, go T-Birds, and that's where I spent my youth. as my mother would say, we grew up on the dark side of Innisarden. Innisarden is a very wonderful, beautiful, upper middle class neighborhood. With people have these great views of Puget Sound and the Olympic Peninsula and all that. Except we didn't. We were on the dark side, and so we didn't have views of anything but trees. And but we had something that was really cool. Better for me as a kid. We had a creek right across the street from my house, a hidden creek. And me and my buddies would go down there all times, and we would, you know, well, I mean, we'd burn shit. I mean, that's just kind of what we did. I mean, that was the era, you know. It was an era, you know. Speaking of matches, you know, in those days, everybody had the big bowl of matches in the, you know, from the restaurants and everything, and so we'd just take matches and anything we could. What we loved to do was get little army guys, you know, with the little green army guys with the bases, and we'd line them up in formations and stuff, and then we'd like do little war games, and then if you got bombed, then you'd have to pour kerosene on your army guys and light them on fire. That was cool. Don't do that. But it was a different era back then, you know, back in the late 70s and the early 80s. It was like there was no internet, there was no beepers, none of that. You know, your mother would say, in the summer, my mother would say, here's a couple dollars for lunch, be back by dinner, try not to get yourself abducted, right? But right when we were playing down at the creek and hanging out and doing all the stuff we did, it was always weird because you could look across the creek and you could see this on the hill right across the creek up past the woods. You could see some of these mansions poking out. The mansions were from the Highlands. I don't know if any of you guys, are you guys all from Seattle, or you've been here long enough? You know the Highlands? So the Highlands is this really wealthy enclave just right on the city limit on 145th Street. And it was started around the turn of the 20th century by the richest of the rich in Seattle. They started it because they wanted a golf course. They had a 9-hole course in Wallingford, but that wasn't good enough. They wanted a real 18-hole course. And they were talking about it, you know, in their little clubs where they would smoke cigars and drink brandy and talk about golfing. And they said, one of the guys said, hey, you know what, I just clear cut, you know, 600-700 acres up there in North Seattle. Actually, it's pretty cool. It looks just like a links course, you know, in Scotland, where golf was invented. Not like the current day, you know, the modern golf course is all groomed stuff, and you can like do it on video games and stuff. The old links courses were like St. Andrews. If you've ever seen the British Open at St. Andrews, you know, nothing. There's nothing there but this dead grass and sand. He said, we could make a really cool golf course up there. And they all said, oh, that's a great idea. It's 12 miles out of town. No one will bother us. None of the riffraff is coming up here. We're all alone. And so they built this golf course. And they said, you know, we should have cottages up here so that we can spend the night, do a little golfing outing and stuff. Great idea. So they drew lots to get the building lots around the golf course, who got the plot to build on. And the first guy built his cottage, about 8,000 square feet. And the second guy built his cottage, about 10,000 square feet. And so on, until they had these gigantic mansions all around in this area. And this area was called the Highlands. So I grew up kind of in the shadow of the Highlands, and I was always amazed, like, who lives there and why are they different? And they were of mystery. Like us, we made up stories about them. I'm sure they're very wonderful, normal. Some of you may live in the Highlands, I don't know. But as kids, we made up all sorts of crazy stories about these people. And I realize now that, you know, so when did if you were to ask me, when did you start writing this book, A Sudden Light? I'd have to say, about 1973, because that's when we moved to that neighborhood and I started noticing all this kind of stuff. I think it's a fascinating history, and the history is all throughout the book. The history of Seattle, of the timber barons, of the railroad barons, how Seattle developed, the struggles that went on. I find it fascinating, you know, all the stuff about the Olmsted brothers, who were brought in to do a comprehensive city planning. I live down in the Mount Baker neighborhood, and it's just beautiful winding boulevards and everything. And to learn that all that happened around this era when the founders of Seattle said, we need a comprehensive plan for parks. And so they brought in the Olmsted brothers, who were the sons of Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park, among many other great monuments in the U.S. And they did this plan of every house will be within a half a mile of a playground or a park. That was the concept. And so they started with this boulevard, and it's still, the remnants are still there. You can still walk this from where they started down near Seward Park up through, all Lake Washington Boulevard, and then over through Interlochen and all through there. All those parks were Olmsted, the Frink Parks and Madison Park and all that kind of stuff. And if you notice, if you look at the map, they're like little slivers of green space owned by the city between houses, or there's these little pocket beaches down on Lake Washington where you can just go and use the beach. It's free access. All this stuff was done in that era, and I find that era quite fascinating. So part of that era infiltrates my new book, A Sudden Light. It's a multi-generational family saga about 5 generations of a timber baron family, the Riddell family. Once immensely wealthy, very influential, and since fallen from grace. But more than that, A Sudden Light is a book about fathers and sons and how that relationship ripples through generations of a family. It's about our connection with nature. There's a lot of stuff in the historical aspects of it about transcendentalism, about Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau and John Muir is throughout the book. These ideas that we are all one, we are all connected with nature, that God is in everything and we are in everything as well, so we are all connected. And this is sort of our relationship in that regard. And then, like even a step beyond that, A Sudden Light is about being open to seeing the unseen. So looking beyond the facade. It has been called a ghost story by some. I think it even says ghost story in here. It is a ghost story. There's a ghost in it. But it's not a scary ghost story. There's nothing, there's not a single guy with a hockey mask and an axe. You guys didn't see Friday the 13th? Johnny Depp will never be found dead in a waterbed. Nightmare on Elm Street? I'll come up with something more topical. I don't know.
Ghosts.
Oh yeah, you're right. But there's, I think Friday the 13th, he was a ghost, wasn't he? Was he dead or not? Anyway, let's not worry about that. Let's not bog down in the details. The point is, it's not like a scary ghost story with hands reaching through walls like Poltergeist or something like that. It's a spiritual story. It's a story about our connection with our past. A theme that's common throughout my books is we must come to terms with our past before we can move on to our future. And so with this book, I took it generationally. So you have to come to terms with not only your past, but the past of your ancestors in order to move on as a family. So let me just read a couple of quick passages, and then I think that'll sum it up for you. This is just from the first paragraph of the prologue. The curse. Growing up in rural Connecticut, I had been told the name Riddell meant something to people in the Northwest. My paternal great-great-grandfather was someone of significance, my mother explained to me. Elijah Riddell had accumulated a tremendous fortune in the timber industry, a fortune that was later lost by those who succeeded him. My forefathers had literally changed the face of America. With axes and two-man saws and diesel donkeys to buck the fallen, with mills to pulp the corpses and scatter the ashes, they carved out a place in history for us all. And that place, I was told, was cursed. So the story begins with adult Trevor, the youngest in the line of the Riddell family. He's an adult, he's got 2 kids, he's got a wife, and he brings them back to the site of the North Estate to tell them the story of what happened to him when he was 14 years old. And his father brought him to the North Estate for the first time. The North Estate is my fictionalized version of the Highlands. So the bulk of the story takes place in 1990. And I did that for a specific reason, because I wanted it to have that feeling of what I grew up with, that feeling of isolation. When this kid goes there, he doesn't have any contact with the outside world. There's no internet. There are some channels on the TV, but not very many, and it's all through antennas, and there's no cable and that kind of thing. He's brought to this place because he's in a difficult situation. He grew up, he had a pretty nice life. He's an only child. 14-year-old Trevor was an only child. His father Jones Riddell built wooden boats for a living in the traditional wooden boat building style, not highly lucrative. They grew up in Connecticut, a little farmhouse in Connecticut. It was kind of ideal. Trevor's mother, who was originally from England, very smart, really brilliant, PhD in comparative literature from Harvard, but she never does anything. She's never done anything with her brilliance, as Trevor says. She reads constantly. There are books stacked up all over the house, and she's always giving him books to read. So she's feeding him, but there's nothing else beyond that. And then when he's 14 years old, his father loses his business. They declare bankruptcy, and under the strain of this financial hardship, his parents decide to separate. His mother goes back to England for the summer to be with her family, and Trevor's father brings him to Seattle, to the site of the ancestral mansion, Riddell House in the North Estate. There's a plan. The plan is the Jones and his sister are going to sell off the land. They have 204 acres. With basically no zoning restrictions at all due to the way the deals were done back then. And they can sell it however they want, and they can make millions of dollars. Trevor is all for this because he feels that if his father is fiscally solvent, maybe he'll get back together with his mother. And what does he want except to have a mother and a father? So he goes back there with his father. He sees this house on this huge acre of land, these 200 acres of land, and this house is huge. It's 50 bedrooms at least. It's just massive. And what's crazy about it is it's built out of gigantic logs, whole trees, as pillars, columns holding up the roof, and the trees still have their bark on them. It's like it's growing out of the forest almost. And they get closer to it, and he realizes it's totally falling apart. It's just really, it hasn't been kept up. It's not sound. It's crumbling. They go inside. They meet. Trevor meets for the first time his aunt, Serena. When his father said, "You're going to meet your Aunt Serena," he thought, well, she's going to be like Mrs. Doubtfire, dowdy old, "Oh, I'm going to take care of you now." But she isn't. She's 35 years old, and she's smoking hot. And she wears these beautiful dresses, and she talks with this weird affectation like she's out of a Tennessee Williams play. And her toenails are painted this mesmerizing blue color that Trevor can't keep his eyes off of. You can imagine how this would mess with a 14-year-old, this aunt flirting with him constantly. And then he meets his grandfather for the first time, Grandpa Samuel, who he was told has Alzheimer's disease, maybe, in and out of dementia. Sometimes he's coherent, but often not. He jumps up from the table and writes down things on Post-it notes. They make no sense afterwards. You look at them, they're nothing, gibberish. When Trevor first meets him, his grandfather is sitting on the porch in the hot baking sun, wearing all black pants, black shirt, and there are words on his shirt, and Trevor looks in, he's, "What's written on his shirt?" And there's a phrase written on his shirt, and it says, "God was my co-pilot, but then we crashed in the mountains and I had to eat him." He's like, what on earth is going on here? He just doesn't get it. And so now Trevor is thrust into this very difficult world where there's no one to trust. His father doesn't tell him anything about his past, is reticent at best. His Aunt Serena is always a game. It's always a game she's playing with him. She's flirting with him. His grandfather may or may not have dementia. His mother is on a telephone, when he can get her on the phone, she's time zones away in England. He can barely hear her. And so he starts exploring. And he starts going through this house, and he realizes, in those days, those houses were built with, front of house and back of house. There were servant stairs and servants' access to things. There were secret doors and hallways for the servants. So the idea was that I don't want to see you. I just want my tea to be served at 3 o'clock. When I walk into the room, I want the tea to be there. I don't want to have any evidence of it being brought in. So there were things, so you can imagine a 14-year-old would really get a kick out of starting to explore these dark back stairways, so forth. I want to read one quick, I'm just going to skip to this. I want to read one part because Trevor, in all these explorations, realizes that there may be somebody there that he can trust. He can't trust anybody else, he thinks, but maybe there is someone. He realizes, starts to believe that there's a spirit in the house. He finds certain letters and correspondence and so forth, and he starts to put things together in weird ways, and connections start to get made in his head and his imagination. And the more he believes that there's a spirit in the house, the more the spirit shows himself. And so he finally comes to believe that it's the spirit of his great-grand-uncle Benjamin Riddell, who died very tragically in 1904 on the property. And so as Trevor believes more, Ben starts revealing more, and Ben starts giving Trevor dreams. So let me read this. I just want to read you this. This comes from, it's about this far into the novel. So. It's chapter 30, Behold This Dreamer. We were more than a week into our stay, 10 days by the calendar, and I had taught myself how to walk down the long hallways without making a sound. I had familiarized myself with all the stairways that were obvious and some that were not, back stairs in front, servant stairs in front of house. I had found linen closets with hidden panels to store things. What was stored in these places over the decades, I didn't know. I understood Riddell House in a way I could only describe as fundamental. Sometimes, when I walked down the long corridor at night and ventured into the south wing, I felt as if I had become the house. The house told me where to turn, where to go next, what to discover, and when I stopped in a room during my nightly explorations, I always knew Ben was there with me, because I breathed with measured breaths, and I didn't move a gram of body weight. I made no sound. I waited until Ben's shallow breath fell out of sync with mine, and I could hear us both breathing. I didn't want anything from Ben but the truth. He was there when my grandmother died. He knew what happened between my father and his mother and father, and he seemed to be the only one who was willing to tell me anything. I stood in a room that was entirely empty except for a bare mattress on a metal frame. The moon shone across the water and tickled the ceiling and walls with flecks of light. I heard Ben's breath, independent of my own, so I knew he was with me. He placed his hand on my shoulder and leaned toward me so I could feel his phantom weight, and he whispered my name. Tell me, I said, but he said nothing. That night, I had another dream. So Ben starts to dream through Trevor, and these dreams are very vivid, and they have the history of things that happened with the family when Ben was alive, that there's no way Trevor could know that. It's not written down anywhere, and Trevor starts to learn and understand the source of dysfunction in these multiple generations of this family. And he starts to realize that what cannot happen is the land to be developed. And therefore, he now comes into opposition with his father. Once again, the father and son rift, rearing its ugly head. And so Trevor has to decipher the puzzle, hopefully, before the end of the book. That's good to do, and see what the fate of the family should be. I just want to say one real quick thing about the dreaming thing. When I started writing the novel as a novel, I actually wrote it as a play first in 2004, but then I started working on it as a novel, and went in 2009. And you know, when you're writing a book, it's like it's the author's job to get it going, right? It's like there's a giant boulder on top of a hill. And it's my job, if it's my book, it's my job to go up to the top of the hill and to start pushing that boulder and get it started and get the momentum going. And then it kind of starts to roll for itself. And when it gets a certain momentum, it tells you where it's going. Because it's not about you anymore, it's about the trajectory of the story. So when I first started writing this book, I was pushing on it, and something happened rather unfortunate in my life. My father got very sick, got a lung. We still don't know what exactly it was. The doctors just said things like, has he been to the Sahara Desert recently, and has he been sweeping mouse droppings out of an attic, pointing toward acute respiratory issues. He went to the hospital, and then in the hospital you get sick of being in the hospital, and there's a ball rolling, and then he died 5 weeks later. And I got caught up in it, as we do. My sister lives in California, and my mother was, of course, very upset. She's still lived in the house up in Shoreline. So I dealt with the business of death. It's good sometimes. That's how you deal with things, because it's easy to do, making phone calls and so forth. So I didn't really think about it too much. Several months after he died, I had a series of dreams on consecutive nights, and they were very vivid and very clear and very lucid, very specific, and they were all the same, yet they were all different. They were not repetitive in any way. But in each of the dreams, my father would come to me, and we'd have a brief conversation. It wasn't long, and it wasn't really about anything important. It was about daily life, about mowing the lawn. It was about dealing with the dog's ear. It was about, then sometimes there would be more profound things, talking about, bigger ideas. and so forth. But it was always very interesting, and they, as I say, they never repeated. And I remember them very clearly. And then after the fifth night of these dreams, that was it. He went away, and I've never seen old Marvin again. He's been gone ever since. We like to explain a lot with science in our culture. We love science. Oh gosh, it can explain anything, really. And so we could sit there, right? We can draw it all out. It's easy. I had a piece of pepperoni pizza before I went to sleep. I was traumatized by my father's death. Synapses randomly fired, triggering certain memory pockets, and therefore I had these dreams. And we can say, okay, dismissed, all done. Or what I prefer to do is try to see the connections that we don't always see. The ideas of luck and coincidence. Yeah, sure, we could say it's luck or coincidence. But how do you know there isn't a connection there that we just don't understand? Or we don't see how it makes sense? But from a different perspective, maybe it does. So I prefer to think that my father did have something unresolved when he died. He died, he was 75. He walked 4 miles a day. He did yoga twice a week. He wasn't the guy who was going to die. And then he died. So maybe, for me at least, he had something unresolved and he wanted to come and give me some more information he felt was necessary. And he did. He gave it to me, and then he was done. And then he went off to continue his journey. So I put that in the book because I realized that, you know, I dedicated the book to my dead father because my father obviously, all our fathers influence us when they're alive. That's the relationship, right? But it was also through his death and then after his death that he greatly influenced what this book was about, that it is about fathers and sons and ghosts and these ripples and these connections that maybe we overlook sometimes, but maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should believe in them. Maybe we should have faith. And so that's a big part of the book. So that's A Sudden Light. I hope you enjoy it. I hope if you do, please tell your friends about it. So there's more I could talk about, but then I would just be monopolizing. So any questions about anything at all? Because I could come up with one question.
Have you been in any of those mansions up on the Highlands?
I've never been into the Highlands. I've never done the Highlands. And I know there's some pretty impressive stuff up there. One of the settings in the book is Elijah Riddell's City House on Minor Avenue, and that's really based on the Stimson Green Mansion, which is you can visit, you can go in and see and stuff like that. It's very, very cool. So yeah, but most of this is really out of my head. Oh, there's something you might find interesting. So I did a website just for if you're interested in the history of Seattle and stuff, I did a website just for the book, asuddenlight.com. And you go to it and you can see an artist's rendering of the North Estate. And you hover over different pieces and you can click on them and get more information about all the topics that are in the book. If you go to Ben's Tree, there's some free tree climbing in the book of these huge Douglas fir trees. And I did some tree climbing to do research. So I made a little video of it when I climbed this redwood last summer. I wore one of those cameras. And so there's that kind of stuff on it. And there's also some stuff about the history of how I came up with the house. When I was doing research in the history of Seattle, I learned about the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition in 1909, which was set right here, right over there at the University of Washington. In those days, the University of Washington was downtown. Guess what? On University. And so they built this exposition here, and when it was over, they gave the land and the buildings to the university. That's when the university moved here. One of the buildings that they built, so many of those buildings were built for this exposition. One of the buildings that is no longer there, which is one that caught my eye, was the U.S. Forestry Pavilion. And it was built as a temple to timber. And it was just supposed to really impress everybody with the magnificence of the Northwest trees. And so they built it using these gigantic whole trees as columns and pillars, right, with the bark on them. That's where I got that idea. They didn't treat them in any way. They did no, pest prevention in anyhow. And so after a number of years, beetles got into the wood and they became unsound and they had to knock it down. So it's no longer there. But they have photographs. I found all these photographs in the archives. And so I have them on my website if you want to look at the some of these ideas of this, like what this building, what was in my head when I was thinking. Now the practicalities of building a house out of entire trees. I'm a fiction writer, not an architect. But that's what's fun about reading. I just need to get the picture of it in your head, and then you build it. Your architect builds it, and then you make it happen make it work in your head. So you should check out that website. Anything else? Yes, sir.
You know when the new Racing in the Rain movie is coming up?
The Racing in the Rain movie. Gosh, I don't know. I don't know when it's coming out, and then I'll also say I don't know if it's ever coming out. It's Hollywood. I'm dealing with Hollywood now, and they control it, and we have a director and a script that is really not very good.
Do you have a say in that?
I do not. I do not. No. At some point, a guy shows up at your door with a giant Publishers Clearinghouse check. And then you call up your agent and say, why is this guy standing at my door with this Publishers Clearinghouse check? And he said, how much is your integrity worth? And you look at the number. You look at the number on this check and you think, okay, 3 kids got to go to college. And yeah, no, that's good enough. Come on in, bring it in. Honestly, look, you live and learn. When I made the film deal with Universal for The Art of Racing in the Rain, no one really thought the book was going to do very well. So they were the only suitor. So if now I would, in retrospect, I would not have. I would have waited. But I just don't think that they have the right people on board yet. But maybe they can. Heck, they got 10 years. They got 10 more years to figure it out. So that's the way the system works. Yes, sir.
When did you first start actually putting the book down on paper?
When did I first start putting the book down on paper? Well, so I started writing it as a play in 2004, which was really a trippy thing. I was between books at the time, and I had all this nervous energy. We were doing the editing of How Evan Broke His Head and Other Secrets, and I wanted to work on something, and so I after the kids, my 2 older boys would go to sleep, I would go in my little office there and work, and so I wrote between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. and I put REM's Life's Rich Pageant on auto repeat, which is weird in and of itself, and then had weird visitations from these characters saying things, and it became it was a very cool play. It was very fun to do and fun to write, and some of the characters have survived, some haven't, and some there are new characters in the book, and some have been shuttled to the wayside, but Serena and Grandpa Samuel and Brother Jones, they're all straight from the play. So I have to say that that was really the character studies. Then I started to write the book in 2009, and I struggled mightily with it because I wanted it to be about the present day family, but reaching back into time with the history, and it wasn't working. So my wife, who's always my first reader, and she's a really great editor and a top-notch advisor, she's like, just start it from the beginning and tell it chronologically. And you'll find out if you should tell it like that or if you mix it up, but you don't know enough about the backstory yet. So I did. I started writing 1879 Portland, Oregon, when, this guy first arrives and gets going through Aberdeen and then Shelton and then up around, the whole history of all this. And I spent over 2 years writing it. Had 100,000 words of a book. Thought, this is great. I turned it in even to my editor, and she's like, what? This isn't the book you told us you were going to write. And I'm like, oh no, it's better. And this is part 1. So they kind of freaked out a little bit, and I realized, oh, maybe that was premature. So I had my crisis. I had a crisis, and I talked to my wife again, and she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I either have to walk away from it or take all that I've just done for 2.5 years and set it aside, and then start over," which is what I did. But all the stuff that I had done was pre-writing. It was research. I always tell this story. I have good buddies who write nonfiction. Tim Egan, Eric Larson, David Laskin. These guys are they write nonfiction stuff, and they're great at it. It's nothing for them to do 2.5 years of research on a book. Eric Larson, are you kidding? 2.5 years? Easy. He does on research. So as a fiction writer, I had to do that research to write this book. And I think that if any of you are fiction writers out there, I think it might be worth thinking about this idea that we have to do due diligence. That we can't, just because we write fiction doesn't mean we don't have to lay the foundation for the house. And it has to be solid. And it's got to be bricks and mortar. And if you do the little stick thing, if someone blows hard enough, they will knock it down. And then this happens. If you write fiction, sometimes you're writing a story or a book, and my phrase is, suddenly it turns into water in your hands, right? It's gone. The foundation isn't there. So do the due diligence, do the work, do the homework. Anybody else?
What are you working on now?
What am I working on now? Interesting. So that's a segue into Enzo Races in the Rain. So they came to me and they're like, oh, can we do like a picture thing, a gift book or something for The Art of Racing in the Rain? My publisher came to me and they said, because we think we can squeeze more money out of this idea. And I said, it doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem right. I'd like to do something with some ballast at least, you know? And so we came up with this idea of doing children's picture books using little Enzo to tell wonderful stories. So this is the first one, just came out this fall. And it's so cute, little Enzo. And see, I gotta show you this. This is really funny. There's Denny. See, Denny's there. Denny's the guy. He's the dad. And then they go to the farm and get Enzo. And this is really okay. So look at that. See that? That's really funny. See this, the little car there going through the woods. So when the illustrator first sent it to me, he had Denny driving an SUV, and I said, Denny doesn't drive an SUV. And I sent him all these pictures of BMW 3.0s. And he said, well, but can you have 4 doors? Because it's just going to be better for me to put the back. And I said, yeah, sure. So I sent pictures of the Bavaria, which is the 4-door version. Anyway, so it's really cute. And you can even, if you look carefully, you can even see the zebra. There's a demon zebra there. And then they go, and it's fun. Oh, and here, this is kind of cute, too. You'll like this, because you guys are local. So there's a big chase scene, and Enzo's running, and everyone's chasing him. Everyone in town is chasing after him, right? They're trying to catch him, because it's racing. Get it? And then Bob, the illustrator, said, hey, there's some storefronts, and as the author, you get naming rights to the storefronts. So I named them. There's a bookstore, Secret Garden Books, which is a great kids bookstore. You know where it is?
They're every 2 weeks.
It's awesome, right? It's right in Ballard. It's a great kids bookstore. And then Victrola Coffee on 15th Avenue, which is the place, if you remember The Art of Racing in the Rain, where Denny and Mark Fine go to have their meetings with the lawyer, or Denny goes to have it with his lawyer, and there's the girl, the barista is there with the dark chocolate eyes and the pierced eyebrow. So anyway, it's really cute. And and then when they get reunited, Enzo hugs Zoe so hard her Ugg falls off. Come on. So we did this one, and then I just turned in the next year's, which is a Christmas. Next year's going to be the Christmas one, where they go to cut down a Christmas tree at the Enchanted Winds Christmas Tree Farm on Issaquah Hobarth Road. You might recognize some of those locations.
Yeah.
Wait, is it like a new Racing in the Rain book?
Well, but it's for kids. It's like a little picture book. Yeah, so little Enzo we call him. And then I'm working right now, and they said I could go hard. I was allowed to do really whatever I wanted to for the. So I'm working right now on the Enzo Halloween.
Oh, yes.
That's going to be scary. I mean, come on! If you're a dog on Halloween, you must freak out all the time, right? Like suddenly everybody's transformed into something. I mean, like you can imagine how a little puppy might get a little excited by this. These evil pumpkins everywhere. They're like trying to get into everyone's house, but they're really slow moving, so you can kind of like work around them. Anyway, so I'm working on that, and I'm taking notes on my new book, my new novel, which I'm not going to tell you anything about because you're not going to understand it anyway. It's good. There probably will be there'll be at least one dog in it. There's definitely going to be a goat. There will definitely be a goat in it. Sir.
Is there
Sequel to Racing in the Rain. No. I know. There can't be. I mean, a story is a story. Look, why do we read books? Why do we read books?
To have fun and enjoy the story.
That's right, but also so we can empathize with the characters, right? So that we can understand, we can broaden our vision of the world without even leaving our house. This bookstore has 40,000 different visions of the world. 40,000? Roughly, give or take. Different visions of the world, written by different people, different cultures, different times, about the past, about the future, about all these different... You can learn so much about the world without leaving this bookstore. And one thing you're going to learn is that we all as people share the human experience. We all want something. We want love. We desire for something. Or, as I say, the Rolling Stones, they taught us everything we need to know about life. With one song, they teach us they sum up this entire bookstore. You can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you just might find you get what you need. That is literature, right there. Take it to Shakespeare. So here's the thing, and at the end of a story, what happens? You go up, you do peaks and valleys, and then you have a catharsis at the end. You have that moment, you have that thing. When you close Charlotte's Web, you think, oh, my heart aches. I can't believe Charlotte, she's gone. And you feel so sad, but you know what? There's no sequel to that. Charlotte's gone. So we have to sometimes accept that our life is about episodes. Our life is about highs and lows, and we don't get to repeat them over and over again. And sometimes the first time we do something is really the best time. And we should just remember that as we're doing things. Live thoughtfully, live consciously, right? If you remember as you do things that that is the experience, not trying to watch it on videotape or see it in a movie again and again and again. So anyway, we don't have to bog down in that. That got kind of, it went down a little dark, narrow tangent. I apologize for that. All right. So I can talk all day, and we have plenty of wine. We just hang out and you can buy books. You have any more questions? You're looking kind of.
Well, I'm always curious how an author chooses a title for his book. Sometimes a lot is told in the title, and sometimes it means nothing to the book.
Well, hopefully it should say a lot with very few words. It's very difficult, and there becomes a whole marketing aspect of it. And for instance, I worked with A Sudden Light for a long time as my title, and as I kept writing it, I had this thing in my head. I wanted to change it to Timberland. I thought this Timberland would be really cool, like Chinatown. One word, it says everything. And so I turned it in actually as the finished book. I said Timberland is the title. And then there's this there's Timberland boots, there's Timberland the rapper, there's all these trademark issue. So I went back to A Sudden Light because I felt that it is what the book is about. The idea that happens, I didn't read to you, but if you read the book you'll see, and that's why you have matches, is that there is a certain stairway in Riddell House that Trevor is told about, that if you strike a match, you will see the apparition of the house. You will see Benjamin Riddell, a fleeting image of Benjamin Riddell, that in this burst of light, you catch a glimpse of the other side. And so that kind of reverberates through the book because, sure, that's the microcosm, but then also in a weird way, Trevor is the lit match that shines the light on the history of the family so that the family can move forward into the future since they're struggling so hard. So I think everything is different. The Art of Racing in the Rain, I just knew the title. There was no question. Raven Stole the Moon, I didn't know the title, but then I went to the Museum of the Native American at the time it was in New York, and I turned a corner and there was Raven Steals the Moon. I was like, well, that's it. I came here for a sign, and guess what? I got a sign. It deals with Tlingit Indian mythology and stuff. My mother's family is from southeastern Alaska. That's right. That's right. So we'll do one more question, and then we'll hang out, or two more questions. Now you guys have become so talkative. Go ahead, you first.
What advice do you have for readers?
Advice for readers. Well, that's an interesting question. I would say give the benefit of the doubt to the author for as long as you can. That there is a plan, theoretically. But if it doesn't come together for you, you don't have to finish it. But that doesn't mean that it's the worst book ever written or the writer is a horrible person. It means that it didn't lock up with you. And remember, it's a conversation. And so not every book is going to be right for every reader. And it's nothing personal. Some people don't vibe with certain things. Some people would say, I don't want to read a book that has a spirit in it who is talking about, the ongoing nature of spirit lives. Okay, that's cool. This is not the book for you, right? So some people say, I'll never read a book narrated by a dog because dogs are dogs. They don't think like people. That's personification. That's, I would never. Then don't read The Art of Racing in the Rain. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person for writing the book. It really doesn't. So, that's all. I think that do due diligence, put in the effort, and if it does work for you, what I always like to say when I talk to students, literary fiction is not it's not a mystery. It's not suspense. It's not genre fiction. We know what happens. We should know what happens. When people say, oh, it's so predictable. Yeah, it definitely is predictable. So understand that what we're trying to do is take you through a journey that will have this idea of the payoff at the end, the catharsis at the end. If you look at some great books, you can see how the writer sets it up. You can tell, it's my belief that in the first chapter of a well-constructed literary novel, by the end of the first chapter, you know how the story is going to end, who the main characters are, what the whole deal is about. You got it all. You have all the information by the end of the first chapter. You may not know it, but the author's already given it to you. If you take Of Mice and Men, which is when I talk to high school, I talk to high school students a bunch, and they all read Of Mice and Men, John Steinbeck, right? At the end of the first chapter, what happens? You got Lenny and George, and they get off the bus at this ranch, and they're going to go to the ranch, this new place where they're going to go for their new job, and they stop before they get to the ranch house, even though it's evening, and George says, let's stop here and build a fire, we're going to lay out our bedrolls, let's eat some canned beans, and George is like, Lenny's like, well, I want to go get the hot food. I want to get the hot food at the... No. Let's eat here tonight, and then we'll go there tomorrow morning, and we'll start fresh. Okay, so they build a fire, and they eat their beans, and as they're eating their beans, George says to Lenny, Lenny, if something bad happens, like happened at the last ranch we were at, what I want you to do is meet me right here by the lake. Can you do that, Lenny? And Lenny's like, yeah, sure, George, no problem. Tell me about the rabbits. And they go to sleep. And that's the end of the chapter. I have a question for you. Is anything bad going to happen? Where's the last scene of the book going to take place? Right there in that spot. John Steinbeck tells it to us. And yet we don't go on Amazon and say, 1 star, too predictable. No. Because it's not about the prediction, it's about how the story plays out. We want to tease out, how do we get now back to this spot, right? So that's the idea of having, hopefully your writer has, if you've picked a good book, I've written 4 of them. No, I'm kidding. If you've picked a good book, hopefully that'll take you on that journey. So, last question.
Okay, you may need to forgive me for this question, but how do you feel if you're a fairly young writer and you've created such a beloved character in Enzo, and you may want to comment on, you may spend a great deal of time explaining why you won't write about him more.
Yes.
I don't know if you've thought about that at all, or if you have a comment on, we all love him, the world loves him, and we want you to write more about him, and you even tonight had to explain that, and I think we understand it, but I'm guessing you always have to do that.
Yes, Enzo will live with me for the rest of my life, and I'm very honored that Enzo chose me to be his storyteller. I do believe in spirit stuff. And I do believe that there are certain literary characters that have souls, and that Pip, from Dickens' Pip, or Stephen Dedalus, there are characters who are more than just on the written page. And so people relate to that character in a larger sense. That being said, there's only a certain trajectory of the... I don't see a story that could continue Enzo's journey without it feeling exploitative. And that would be selfish on my part. And I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I'm sorry. If one day I wake up and I think, oh, I got it, then I'll do it. But I'm not going to do it just to try to lure a literary audience. I just can't. I put too much. I believe in books too much. I believe that books have too much value and they offer too much to the people. And I've always made a promise. I've always said I'm never going to allow a book to be published with my name on it that isn't the best book I could ever possibly write. It's not fair. I'm asking too much of readers. A reader not only has to plunk down cold hard cash for a book or wait online for many months at the library to get a book, but the reader, then I want more from you. Then I need your time. And that's even more valuable. And I need your attention. You can't just do it, hey, I'm doing some dishes and I'm also reading a book. No. If you're going to read a book, and if you're going to read my book, I want you to devote yourself to it and do it thoughtfully. I want you to, because I think if you do, you'll get a lot out of it. So if I'm going to ask you for your time, your attention, and your money on top of that, if it isn't the best book I've ever written, I suck. Really. So it took me this has been 6 years since The Art of Racing. The Rain came out before this came out. And people say, why did it take so long? I said, that's why. Because this is the best book I've written. And the next book I'm going to write will be the next best book I've written. And I'm not going to let it out until it is. So I have really good ideas for it. And I think you're really going to like it. And I'm excited to get started on it. I wrote The Art of Racing in the Rain in 4 months. I wrote this in 5 years. I don't know. So hopefully somewhere in the middle. But yeah, and I do appreciate that Enzo is so beloved. And it really has been a lot of fun. And I love meeting readers who've read Enzo. And I know that Enzo means a lot to people. I don't believe dogs talk. They think really loud thoughts. That's pretty clear. But yeah, so look, it's all good. I think that what I wanted to do is make people understand that I have the ideas in my books are all pretty consistent in terms of themes, in terms of redemption, in terms of coming to terms with your past and before you can move to your future. These themes are all throughout all my books. One of my books has dogs and race cars in it. So who knows? Maybe I'll do another animal book. You guys are lost. All right, but we can hang out. If you want to buy any books, though, you got to do it like now. And I'm going to sit over here and drink all the rest of the wine and talk to you guys and sign books. Yep. All right.